was reading an email from a friend recently, and the friend signed it with high hopes. And that phrase took me aback a little bit. I had been complaining about what's going on in the world and how things aren't changing, blah, blah, blah. And he wrote back about possibilities and joy and dreams and changes he was seeing and strange wonders. And then he signed it with high hopes. I'm normally a low hope sort of guy. Some people hope for the best, some people hope for the best and prepare for the worst, some people prepare for the worst and hope for something bearable, hope for something pretty good, and I am often in that camp, I think. And for me, this is because of fear. I fear getting my hopes up, thinking things can change, and then having my hopes dashed and feeling my heart move from my chest to my toes. It can be difficult to let go of our fear to fully embrace hope. Embracing hope means that we believe that life can change even when nothing suggests that this is possible. Now, I don't know how this happens, how we embrace hope. I don't know if this is something we choose to do. I don't know if this is something that God mysteriously does in us. I imagine it's a combination of the two. But I know that life changes when we can hold on to hope. Life changes when we trust that God's love is really stronger than the problems that we face. Life changes when we trust that God's love is really more powerful than the evil that's present in the world. Life changes when we trust that even though we may be walking through misery right now, that God's love can bring new life and happiness in the future. That God's love can't be extinguished, that it still is with us. Now, it might take time for love to do the work it needs to do. It always takes more time than we want it to for God to bring new life for us. But for us to believe in hope, we believe that love is still there, still powerful, still moving us towards wholeness. Life changes when we decide to live in another story. So I'm going to live in this story of love and hope because this story of fear isn't doing anything for me. It's not bringing the results that I'm looking for. So I'm going to try this one instead. This is what Advent is about. We're honest in this season about what is most painful in our lives. We're honest about what is truly evil in the world. And in spite of it, thumbing our nose at it defiantly, we hope. We believe in love and believe in love's ability to break into our world in powerful ways. We believe so deeply in God's love that we're willing to wait for it, knowing that at some point we will hear the cry of the Christ child piercing the night. Hopes are high in our passage from Isaiah for today that Marie read for us. Our passage from Isaiah comes from a time when the people had wandered away from God, and they are aware of it. Their sins and the consequences of those sins are very present for them. They know the harsh reality of life. But even at this time, they call on God to come back, to come to them, to make God's presence known to them. And they don't call on God to just give a pinch of holiness or just throw a dusting of sacred presence their way. They call on God's full presence. They want an avalanche of God's love to come to them. They want a supersized, Hardee's thick burger-sized portion of grace, some obscene portion of grace. They don't call on God for just a tune-up of the messes of the world. They want God to fix the whole deal. And they call on God for this because God has delivered them in the past in a big way, and they believe God can do it again. They have high hopes. Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down, rip the sky to shreds and come to us, God. Come down so that the mountains would quake at your presence, as when fire kindles brushwood, as when fire causes the water to boil. Last spring, I had the opportunity to help with a prairie burn. I say help because for me that meant I got to wear a yellow fire suit and walk around with a fire tamper and listen to Mike Damp as he was telling me all the things that were going to happen that I really didn't need to do. And it was great. It was just a small little prairie burn, and it was completely under control. But it was amazing once the fire was kindled and the switchgrass and the big blue stem was ignited. It was so powerful, and it was so loud. And there was just this brick wall of heat that came at you. And you couldn't do anything but walk away. And I could only imagine how powerful an out-of-control prairie fire or a forest fire with flames leaping into the air would be. And this is the sort of God, this is the sort of power that the people of Israel are calling for. They boldly call on this God because they have experienced power like this in the past in their life. In verse 3, the prophet says, "When you did awesome deeds that we did not expect, you came down, the mountain quaked at your presence." Psalm 77 says, "You are the God that works wonders." Now, over and over in the times of waiting, the people of Israel tell the story of being delivered from slavery in Egypt. They remember God's big things. And they have high hopes that God can do and will do big things again. There are a couple of quotes that I've been thinking about this week. One comes from Reinhold Niebuhr, an important theologian of the mid-20th century. And he said that nothing that is worth doing can be completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing that is worth doing can be completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. And I like this quote because it suggests that the work of God's love is long-term. It takes time. We play a small role in moving our world towards wholeness, and we can't possibly see all that is possible in the future. And the other quote that I've found helpful and been thinking about comes from a theologian named Sally McFague. And she writes this. She writes, "God is not a being in whom we should believe, but the breath of life in every being that exists. God is not a possibility within reality, but reality itself. To say yes to God is simply to trust reality. It is to acknowledge that reality is good." Now, what I like about this quote is that she takes God from being a being that might be out there to reminding us that God is here in our midst, that we live in God, that we are surrounded by God, that there's no way we can possibly escape from God's presence. Now, we live in a time where we wonder about what God is really able to do. What power does God have anyway? In this digital age, in this time when it's in Apple that we trust, when we look to technology for our salvation, we can be laughed out of a room if we dare to say that we place our trust in love to solve our problems, to make life better. And if you say that you believe that this powerful love is God, then you're telling fairy tales. But this is what we believe, and it's what we say and remind ourselves during Advent. That God is powerful love, and God is as real as the ground that we walk on. Powerful love, it's here, and it's in us, in each and every one of us. Even in our fighting, it's in us. Even when we've messed up our lives and don't know where to turn, it's in us. Even in our political ugliness, love is in us. God's power is in the people we love. God's power is in the people we can't stand. And this love is just waiting to break into our world and our lives in a new way. If we do what the Israelites did, which was look back at their history and tell their stories of God doing big things, then it may be easier for us to have hope, to have high hopes even. They looked back and said, God delivered us from slavery. God delivered us from exile. And It's important for us to remember that God's action didn't stop once they stopped putting the Bible together. God's action continues. As we look at our history, our story, our recent history, we see God moving too. Whenever I think about the Protestant Reformation and that time in history when so many people, and all the chaos that followed, when so many people died simply because of what they believed, being Catholic or being Protestant, I wonder if anyone could possibly have imagined a country like our own, where you are free, truly free, to believe what your heart believes is true. And you don't need to live under threat that someone might be after you because of what you believe. Who would have thought this was possible 500 years ago? Powerful love did this. God did this. As the founding fathers of our country were framing our Constitution and thinking about what laws would look like in a country of religious freedom, thinking about what laws would look like in a country where all men were created equal, there were some women in France who were dreaming of rights, voting rights, equal rights, and a movement began. Now, we can't imagine a world where women aren't valued as full persons, or at least we can't imagine our lives where women aren't valued as full persons. And those countries that still restrict women's rights are under tremendous pressure from the world community. God is still at work, doing big things, changing things in our world. This winter we'll be marking the 150th anniversary of the start of the Civil War. 150 years ago, could Abraham Lincoln or anyone else have imagined that a man of African descent would be living in the White House? Nearly 50 years ago, Martin Luther King shared his dreams with our nation. Did he have hopes as high as electing a black president in less than 50 years? This event puts pressure on our nation to address the racial inequality that still exists. Powerful love has done this, is doing this. God is still moving and working. During the Arab Spring, we saw revolutions overthrowing violent dictatorships. And some of those revolutions were nonviolent themselves. Fewer and fewer governments are able to do violence to their own people, when a few hundred years ago this action was taken for granted. A conversation in our country about inequality, economic inequality, has started because of a few tents close to Wall Street. And that conversation is not going away. It didn't start with violence. It started with people getting together and expressing their grievances. Powerful love is still at work. God is still at work. Maybe it's time to have high hopes. If Sally McFay is right, and God is not a being that is watching our lives from on high, but is the breath of life in all of us, that animating power that not only gives us life, but miraculously sustains us in our living, then a powerful God is not just at work tugging at injustice and slowly pulling us into a better future, but God is also a part of our own individual lives. Why not have high hopes for wholeness, for happiness, for joy in our own lives? Maybe if we look back at our own stories, like Israel has looked back at their history, we will see God present and moving in our lives too. Maybe we will see that love was present when we were sick. Maybe we will see that powerful love was present and reach out to us when we were grieving. Maybe we will see that powerful love was present when our lives were messed up and we didn't know where to turn. Maybe we will see that love was present when we were anxious about money. Maybe we will see that love was present as relationships were falling apart and we were sad and we were lonely. Seeing God moving in our own lives can help us in the waiting times. Seeing God moving in our own lives can give us hope, high hopes even, that God can do a new thing even when we are hurting. God can do a new thing in our economy, with our government, with our groaning creation. Our God works wonders. Our God has power like an out-of-control prairie fire, like an earthquake. Our God can tear open all that is keeping us from wholeness and walk us on through. We are waiting now, but our God is coming to meet us again. Through a child, through love, through a mother's groaning and labor, through a father's smiling eyes. Thanks be to God. Amen.